What is the circle? And why do we get stressed out? Why do we get worried about anything? So first of all, what is the circle? The circle analogy is from the Tao Te Ching. And it says, stay in the center of the circle and allow all things to take their course. So let's break that down. What does that mean? Stay in the center of the circle and allow all things to take their course. What does that mean? That means we need to detach ourselves from anything. We need to stop identifying with anything, right? Staying in the center of the circle is basically higher self, is what happens when we're completely detached and we're observing everything. We don't think we're somebody. So the ego is everything else in the circle. Everything else is in the circle. When we think we're somebody, that's a separateness, right? Our somebodyness, thinking we're somebody, thinking we know, thinking we have control, this causes a separation when really that's a duality, right? When really everything is whole. When we're in the center of the circle observing, we're whole, we're God experiencing itself. But when we're in our ego and we think we're somebody doing something, that's causing a separateness, and that's we're trapped in the illusion. Whenever we're caught in the cycles of thought, which gets us attached, any attachment to the ego, to the cycles of thought, to thinking we're somebody doing something, to thinking we know something. These are all attachments to the illusion. And this keeps us in lower perspectives. And what happens when we're in lower perspectives is we can't see the highest truth. We're trapped in the illusion, and we're going to keep coming back life after life after life. So how do we break free from these lower perspectives, right? How do we get to the higher perspectives? And there's a quote I say often, and I'm going to tell you the quote, and I'm going to show you how it works, right? So when we're born, we're caught in lower perspectives because of all of our programming, right? We're caught in lower perspectives. It is through suffering we grow closer to God. So suffering can break through these hardened perspectives of our programming, right? It is through suffering we grow closer to God. It is through suffering we gain wisdom. And it is through wisdom we gain the ability to help others with their suffering. So when we get through suffering, a lot of times eventually, well, not everybody, but some of us, it breaks through our perspective and starts letting in light. It starts letting in the light of the divine, of the highest perspective. And what happens is we start getting closer and closer to the center of the circle, to God, to our higher selves. And as we get closer and closer to the center of the circle, what happens? We gain wisdom. And as we gain that wisdom, what happens? The closer and closer we can be to being the observer, to being present, what happens? Here comes the divine. Woo, woo. What is the divine doing? The divine is working through us as we become the observer, and it's starting to help break apart perspectives. It's starting to break apart all the suffering, because where does our suffering come from? Why do we stress about anything? Why are we stressed? We're stressed because we're trapped in the illusion of control, and we're trapped in the illusion of our ego. That's why we get stressed. If someone asks, do I ever get stressed about life? Well, yeah, because why? I'm not quite in the middle of the circle. I'm going there, but what happens is the more we practice presence and purification and reconstituting the mind, emptying the mind, things like this, getting balance, right? Facilitating a state of peace. The more we do these things, the less stressed and worried we get, because remember, every second you're in the present moment, you're your higher self, you're kind of standing in the center of the circle when you're present, right? Every second we do that, we're detaching from our ego, because we're not identifying with the ego. Every second we're stuck in cycles of thought, we're identifying with the ego. We're stuck in lower perspectives. We're stuck in the ego land, right? So let's erase this again. So why do we get stressed? We get stressed because we think we have control. And when there is no control, right? Because we get stressed because we have an expectation from a program, but what's expectation supposes control, but there is no control. So if you have an expectation, you're caught in a trap, because you're supposing control when there is no control. Remember, control is part of the illusion. Why does Why do all the greatest spiritual works tell us to give it all up, to surrender? Why does the Tao Te Ching say, stay in the center of the circle and allow all things to take their course? Because when we're in the center of the circle, we're not identifying with the ego and we're not caught in a trap. We're not caught in the illusion. When we're stuck in cycles of thought, when we think we're somebody doing something, we're creating separation. And that's keeping us caught in the illusion. If we want the divine to work through us, remember, so everybody caught in their ego who thinks there's somebody doing something, who thinks they know, who thinks they have control, they're all going to be caught in the cycles of suffering. So how do we help alleviate these cycles of suffering? We got to break our own through how? Presence and purification, right? Reconstituting the mind, getting balance, right? Creating facilitating a peaceful state. And again, when we do that, the divine will start to work through us. We'll get divine understanding. We'll get divine inspiration, something like this. And we start to help break apart the cycles of suffering. So that's how we change the world. Through you can change the world. The greatest way you can change the world is changing your inner world, is breaking free from the cycles of suffering yourself. Remember, the Bible says, remove the plank from your eye so you can see clearly enough to remove the specks from your brothers, right? So we're working on ourselves. That's such a powerful statement, because we have to get ourselves to the center of the circle before we can start getting the divine and helping others figure out that there's a center of the circle and how to get out of their suffering, right? See, it's so wonderful how all this works together. So this is how we do it. We have to, the biggest thing, you have to stop the cycles of thought. And why are we thinking so much? What aggravates the thought? What stimulates the thought? A lot of things can do that, right? That's why there's so much chaos, fear, news, social media, politics, and war, all these things that we get caught into. Everything, it's all creating separation. As long as we're in our ego, as long as we think we know something, you think you know, well, guess what? You're trapped. If you think you know something, you're trapped. Because you're creating separation, you're caught in your ego. The observer is not attached to anything, even knowing anything. The observer is not attached to any outcomes. The observer has no expectations. The observer knows there's no control. Right? That's how you escape stress and worry and suffering. But again, remember, it's a practice, because this is a tricky world we're in. We're born into an illusion. We're born into the illusion of ego. And to escape it and stop coming back over and over and over, we have to dissolve the ego. And remember, every second you're in the present moment, you're dissolving your ego. Because why? Because you're not identifying with it. Every second you're stuck in the cycles of thought and think you're somebody and something's happening to you, that's why you suffer. Because you think you're somebody and something's happening to you. You're identifying with the suffering. We have to stop identifying with the suffering. Ram Dass talks about this. I didn't get that for a long time when he was talking about that. He's like, people are identifying with the suffering. I was like, what the heck is he talking about? They're identifying with. What does that even mean? They're identifying with their ego and the suffering. You got to stop identifying. You got to observe it all, even the suffering. You got to learn how to observe the suffering. You got to stand in the center of the circle. That's how the divine works through you. That's how you get to your higher self, right? So that's, in a nutshell, I mean, I talk about the circle in a lot of my videos, okay? Do your work and step back. Stay in the center of the circle and allow all things to take their course. It's very powerful. That means we need to be present, be the observer. We need to stop these cycles of thought that are keeping us attached to our ego, our somebodyness. Remember, Ram Dass has a book or a movie called Becoming Nobody, because it's all about detaching from the ego. That's how we escape all our stress and our suffering, because the only reason we're worried about anything is because we think we have control. We think we're somebody, we're creating this separateness. Remember, we're going back to the whole. We're going back to the whole. We're going back to God. I am God's eternal love pouring forth. Namaste.